Hello, Seahawks, and thank you for joining us on another Student Live. As always, if you have any comments or questions about today's broadcast, you can feel free to enter them down below in the comment section and take a minute to share this stream with someone in your social network that you feel could benefit from hearing this segment. Today, we're celebrating Earth Day, and with us is Associate Professor of Environmental Sciences, Dr. David Serrano. He'll talk to us about our current environmental impact and things we can do to positively impact our natural environment. Take it away, Dr. Serrano.
All right, thank you, Mendy and Student Life for bringing me in so we could have an opportunity to talk about Earth Day and some of the things you can do and some easy ways to reduce your ecological impact. And so that's probably something you've heard about a lot, your ecological impact or what effect you have on the environment. So one of the hot issues that's probably been around that's on everybody's mind, especially here in South Florida, where we have a lot of tourism and dining facilities and a lot of people coming in and out, is the use of plastics, especially since we're also have a lot of coastal and marine and aquatic systems. This is a place where we get to build up a lot of this refuse. So some of the issues with plastic, and by all means, I'm not saying plastic is evil, so we're just, I'll go over that in a bit, but we're talking about the bad side of plastic. And so one thing about plastic, it doesn't truly degrade. It does break down over a long time period of time, but into just smaller particles. And as it breaks down through wind, wave action, degradation by UV light, and other chemical factors, it breaks up into smaller and smaller pieces until it becomes really small. So the term you've probably heard recently is called microplastics. And that's when the piece of the plastic is about less than or equal to 5 millimeters, which is about a quarter inch. So we're talking about mostly small little bits and pieces and fragments. And this is where it can really start interacting with wildlife, where lots of the small, lower in the food chain and food web organisms will consume them, thinking they're food. It'll fill their stomachs, and basically they starve to death. And there's very other aspects, and then they even get even smaller. So they'll continue to degrade and break up until we get to kind of dust size, or nanoplastics, which isn't really on the media horizon quite yet, talking about nanoplastics. But microplastics is a big enough issue. What did hit the news a little while ago was microbeads, which are small, made on purpose small plastic things that we found, and that was used in a lot of our cosmetic products. So face scrubs, toothbrushes, toothpastes, things like that. Those did get a lot of attention, and back in 2015, Obama signed the Microbead Free Waters Act in 2015, which basically banned plastic microbeads in cosmetics and personal care products. So some from the top down control of that has helped with microbeads, but we still have a lot of the plastic issues. And even before they get big, as you can see by the pictures here, the bigger parts get all wrapped up in animals. You know, they don't have thumbs, they can't really take it off themselves. They get stuck, they get strangled, choked. And so some of the horrific pictures you're probably used to seeing can be an issue too with plastics. And so some of the constant issues we see in the most ubiquitous ones are a lot of those single-use plastic items, ones that are typically used higher in high tourism, high service industry kind of areas where it's these single use. You sit down at a restaurant or you're doing takeout or leaving the restaurant and stuff, and you're gonna get these like plastic straws and coffee cups and all these things. But it's not just limited to there. There's a lot of single-use plastic items in the home that can lead to and end up in the water stream. And a lot of this doesn't end up in our oceans and waterways by accident. So it's not ill-intentioned people just dumping tons of plastic. Well, sure, we have people who litter too, but a lot of times it's people throwing stuff into a waste bin, a garbage can, and does that city, that private company, that hotel, do they recycle it properly? Does that actually get spilled or fall off the truck or so on and so forth and end up? Is that properly recycled or not? And so even the best intention folks of putting these single-use plastics into recycling bins and garbage bins, it could still end up in our oceans and such. And as you can see the list, there's many other plastic items that are in our everyday lives that can end up in the environment. And so you've probably all heard the term reduce, reuse, recycle. And the order of that is important. So we first want to reduce and use less of that. When we can, reuse it and then recycle as kind of the third tier. And so recycling does take energy. Sometimes it's problematic. Recycling rates aren't as high as most people think. So reducing and reusing is probably your best strategy for large gains. But when we look at plastic as a whole, since the 1950s, when the plastic industry really just started shooting off, we've made about 8 billion tons since then. And less of 10% of that total has actually been recycled. There has been some top-down legislation. Hopefully you've seen the news, but Florida actually pushed through as part of one of their Energy, Climate Change, and Economic Security Act back in 2008. They established statewide recycling rates, and so they're hoping by 2020 we would reach 75% of all that stuff being recycled. And so they also put kind of goals, but mind you, these are goals. And the last numbers I saw real quickly before I looked up, in 2018, recycling rate was only 49%. So that's pretty short of our 70% goal. And so there's some complications that happen with that infrastructure ability, the market to take those recycled materials, things like that, that could interfere with these goals. So some states and some areas are legislating and trying to reduce that way, but they can still hit those shortfalls, like I said. And sometimes it has to do with market availability and economics to it too. One example is the city of Corpus Christi in Texas. They don't recycle glass bottles. And that was a decision made by the city that not only was it too costly, but then there was also this weird political thing where since the material was going to Austin, I believe, they didn't like that for some reason, but they deemed it was too costly. So glass isn't even recycled. Last I was there visiting my in-laws. They recycle other things, but not glass. And there's those weird kind of end user market that, yes, you recycle it, but who needs to buy it? And so some of those are also issues we have to come into play. So coming back to plastics, so the large plastics, as you can see by the images here, the overall general rates of how long things take to break down. So a plastic toothbrush can take 500 years. Those coffee pods for a Keurig, 500 years, stuff like that. And this is mostly an ocean. And you can kind of see all those huge numbers. But remember, they don't truly degrade. They break down into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. And so, but you can see it's quite an issue. So as those things are there for hundreds of years, which is kind of hard to conceptualize since we don't live that long. But you can see there's a lot of single-use things that many of us use, right? So plastic cups, toothbrushes, coffee pods, water bottles, straws, all those things. And so there's been a lot of press lately where a lot of cities have been enacting single-use plastic bans. And so, but not everybody's happy about that. You can see here is an op-ed piece about somebody talking about how banning single-use plastics won't solve an overall pollution problem. And so there has been countries um, and other states who have looked at the overall economic and environmental issues with that, where if they completely switch to another system, say paper bags or cotton bags or whatever it is, that the fossil fuel use and the land use and water use and all that would actually be a higher impact to replace that. So that's some of the arguments you're kind of seeing. But just like everywhere, it has to be locally contextualized. So what's our main issue, right? So out west in desert areas, they really worry about water, and water availability. Here, not so much. But so places in the middle of Iowa where they don't see all the straws and plastic on the beaches and tangling with ocean wildlife might not be as important to them. Here, especially where tourism is a big deal, it is. I was just down in the Florida Keys and had some takeout, and all their takeout was in cardboard takeaway, not styrofoam. The straws were paper, things like that, so that they had legislated in that part of the Keys to get rid of those single-use plastics for those, so that they don't end up on their reefs and such and damaging their tourism trade. All right, the other thing I'm going to kind of touch on before we go to the easy ways you could do it is fossil fuels. And so hopefully you've heard in many of your classes, of course, the adds to atmospheric CO2 concentration. So for climate change and such, but also burning for transport leads to air pollutants. So things like nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, ground level ozone, things like that, of just moving the stuff around. And so just transportation of your products. All right. So most of you have heard some of the issues and well aware of it, but a lot of us feel powerless on how we do this. We see the state legislators and the federal lawmakers pushing towards things and enacting these bans, and sometimes you see interest groups the other way fighting against it. And so currently there's that op-ed piece I showed earlier was that a few state senators put together a bill to get rid of another law in Florida's books that doesn't allow the banning of single-use plastics. And so steps in various directions. And so that has to play out. Remember, it used to go out and vote. And so your wants and desires are known by your representatives. So then that's the way you can impact that. But what can you do as an individual? All right, so some of the strategies, and I'm going to kind of highlight some easy ones that you can do in your everyday life that's going to reduce it. And so you got to admit that you can't always just completely change. And so whether that's you yourself or the people you live with, it's going to be hard to get a complete overchange. But doing what you can in some steps is better than none at all, right? So I've adopted a lot of low plastic and low single-use strategies. But when my mother-in-law is here seasonally, that's my 100% rate dips. And so I'm sure a lot of you have some cohabitation or family difficulties with some of those, and that's okay. You don't have to destroy your relationship fighting about with them, but you do what you can. The other thing is price and availability. Some of these products are a little more expensive up front than the cheaper disposable ones, but over time they've becoming more affordable as more companies are getting into the game and more production is happening for those possible replacements. And then and basically any improvement and change in your individual consumer uses does help. And there's a lot of instances we've seen in the market where your choice of where you spend your dollars makes the difference. And I'm going to jump to agriculture here as an example. So if you look at the gallon of milk, they all say they are BTS free. So they don't put that little hormone in it anymore. And so that was a common thing they did with most milks. And about 15, 20 years ago, so some maybe not that far, um, they realized that certain groups started marketing their milk as they were free of that hormone, and they were able to fetch a higher price. And it got to a point where the price the consumer was willing to pay to not have the hormones, it economically was better for them than actually having to buy the hormones and do it and still sell higher volumes. And most of even the generic like Publix brand milk is free of those hormones now because it's become more of a standard. And so your buying power and your choices actually do have power in mass. So what should you do? You should audit of what you actually use. Most of us kind of just second nature, not even realize what we use or what we have around. And take a look at your daily use of your regular products. How many single-use items do you use regularly? Are they plastic? And remember, not all plastic is bad. And so conserving of plastic is actually a good thing. They're made from fossil fuels, but there are important things we need out of plastics, like medical tubing, medical devices, parts of your car, safety equipment, helmets. These are all things that plastics are great for. And those, are used for long periods of time. But those small single-use ones. So some easy one, you saw that coffee pod, I forget what it was, 500 years it said. And so they sell these all over. You don't even have to go to a specialty store. I've seen these in the Publixes and Walmarts and Winn-Dixies and all that. And it's a simple pod to replace the K-cups. And it's, it is plastic with a screen. You could even buy them all metal, but these are pretty affordable. And then you just fill with your own ground coffee. And so that crazily reduces the amount of plastic you're going to produce. And over the long run, it's going to save you money because you can get bulk ground coffee cheaper than what it is already individually in those K-cup. And so that's one source. If you do have one of those Keurig type machines, is by using a reusable pod and refilling yourself. You save yourself money by being able to buy any brand of grounds and buying in bulk. And then you're getting rid of all that plastic that you're dumping every day. The other one that you've seen really common is the use of plastic straws. So those end up in the ocean and such. And so there are bamboo options if you want to be truly plant-based. There's stainless steel options. So I've bought from this company before, so I'm not advertising for them. I'm just giving you an example. And not terribly expensive. $14 and you get 5-6 straws, and these last basically forever. I think I bought my set 5-6 years ago, and they're still pristine and they work. If you're kind of klutzy like my wife and you're worried about like falling and jabbing yourself in the face with a stainless steel straw, they have silicone versions and the bamboo versions and all that kind of stuff. They also have boba versions. So I got that for my daughter who likes those. And so little carrying packs. And the amount I used to buy in plastic straws, a pack is $4 or $5. You're buying 5-6 packs, let's say a year, even if you don't use straws very often, this is going to be a better economic. Like I said, it's a little more money up front, but over time, you'll end up saving funds. The bathroom is another place. You could check for use of single-use plastics. And so there's a lot where there's already versions on the market. And so there's this famous picture of the seahorse holding onto the plastic Q-tip ear swab. But right next to the plastic versions, they have all paper versions of this too, which would degrade and wouldn't have this issue. And that's something that can easily be done, is just switch from the plastic base to the paper base to reduce that plastic. Also, things like disposable toothbrushes, as you saw in the link, it also said so many decades or hundreds of years the toothbrush takes to degrade. Oh, that's right. And once again, you could get, they have toothbrushes made out of bamboo and such like that. And there's lots of either paper-based or biodegradable versions that are made from sustainable forestry items like bamboo. The other place people don't think about is the laundry. And so there's, this happens to be a company I use, but there's a bunch of competitors out there that basically have a similar product. And so laundry detergent, there's two folds here with plastic. So some of the nanoplastics and microplastics actually come from our synthetic clothes as being washed. And so if you really want to go all in, then you could switch to more natural fiber, so cotton, wool, that kind of thing. But with this, these new kind of strips, it's the concentrated detergent that are basically, yeah, like paper strips, and they come in a little pack in cardboard kind of paper that's recyclable. But the big thing is here is that the amount of transport and plastic. So, this one little packet replaces 4 or 5 of these big plastic jugs. And on top of that, you have the fossil fuel shipping costs. So, what it takes, the big trucks to ship all this heavy bottles, and we've all lifted their bottles, they're heavy because they're a lot of water. But you have water for free in your house. Well, not free, but you know what I mean. Substantially cheaper out of the tap. And so by using these kinds of products, none of these plastic bottles are you going to be using. You're reducing all the CO2 emissions from the transport of the product. And honestly, my favorite part is it takes up less room in my utility room, because instead of having, the current bottle and the backup bottle, it's this thin little packet that just slides onto a shelf. And so what I was going to share with you before you see my calendar is a lot of these products you could easily find, and accessibility was a problem 10, 20 years ago, where if you wanted these kinds, you have to find a mail order company or a specialty company, but they've become pretty streamlined now. I'm sure if you're flipping through Facebook, you'll see the Facebook ads for some of these, everywhere from compostable bags, so basically garbage bags that look and behave like plastic, but they'll actually compost down and degrade. So other things to consider is things made from recyclables. So I kind of mentioned some areas not recycling that much because there's no end market for it. So they have all this plastic they've cleaned, chopped up, put into the various piles of the type of plastic. But if no one buys them, there's no market for them. And so some communities, even stop recycling certain materials because there's no end market for them. So by purchasing things that use post-consumer plastic, like for example, these pens by I think by Bic, they've made that plastic of the pen from old water bottles that have been recycled. So kind of that end product. And putting it into things that are going to last long. So you saw like the wood decking and such. So the easy Google searches kind of brings these up to things like sandwich bags, right? And so some people might look at this and say, but it's still plastic bags, right? But when you look at the rate, so you don't like containers, you like the easiness of a bag to zip open and closed. You have these reusables that, they still behave the kind of same way as a plastic bag. They're easy to clean out, but what happens is these are going to replace hundreds of bags by the time these guys break down or get too gross. You don't want to use them anymore, right? Or start having issues. So you don't have to give up using sandwich bags if you like that idea, but being that they're thicker and they're made a little hardier, they last for much, much longer. And so by that, you're reducing the amount of plastic waste you're using. So instead of having single use, it's multiple use. Some places will have there's starter kits if you just want to try, a little bit. Some are pricey, like this beeswax food wrap is kind of on the pricey side, but that's going to replace all like the saran wrap, plastic wrap for food. Let's see, where's the other one I found? Down to like the bamboo toothbrushes and such. So like I said, tons of companies out there. The prices aren't too terrible like we've seen in the past. And so it can make a big difference just with those little everyday stuff you could do. So, cleaning products, instead of buying the plastic, they send you high quality, either glass or thick plastic, and they send you these little refill tablets that you fill your own water and dump in. So once again, there's not trucks moving around tons and tons of weight burning fossil fuels, but rather just light little tablets that you're using your own tap water for. So lots of little things like this you could look at. And the goal is to reduce basically the stuff you use once and throw away, right? And trying to focus on stuff that could be reused or used a few more times instead of just a single. And if everybody did this little bit, then while it's not going to solve the problem, it will reduce and allow things like recycling rates and government subsidies and laws and legislations to kind of catch up with the rate we're pushing out. So hopefully you got a few tips and stuff how to make it better and get an idea of how you can make a difference with some very small and capable choices that won't set you back financially, and in the long term actually save you some cash. So thank you much. And like I said, hopefully you could use these strategies and take an inward look at your everyday use and try to reduce those single-use plastics. All righty. Thank you and have a good one.
Thank you so much, Dr. Serrano, and thank you, Seahawks, for tuning in. Remember to check out the survey link in the description below so that you can send us your feedback about what you thought about today's program. And join us next week where we will meet with the graduating class of 2021. We'll see y'all soon.